Okay, let's have a word of prayer and we will get underway. Thank you, Father, for your faithfulness to us, for the privilege of studying. We ask for your direction. We pray that the things we learn would help us to appreciate the diversity in our world, but also the unity of the gospel of Christ that can be preached, proclaimed, and received anywhere. Thank you in Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, I was looking back through the notes and I realized that there are things in the notes, in fact, quite a few, that we didn't actually fill in. Friday to do identity and the second one that we're going to do. So we're in good shape. Okay, now the mic is working. Now that's okay. So I don't know if there's a. All right. Hopefully it'll be all right. Hope there's not a problem with the. Okay, so let's take time and go back and make sure that we have everything in the notes for you guys. Okay, on page. I don't know, is your numbering the same as mine? Is the first page 7, identity? Is that, or do you even have a page? Okay, so page 8, by the big caution sign, what's the word that goes in there? Stereotypes, right. We have to be very careful, and we're going to do it, but we try to be careful. All right, number 2, identity is perhaps the most significant cultural difference. The word there is significant. And the idea is that a lot of people consider identity to be foundational to understanding all of the others. There's more in common between identity and the other 9 than any other single cultural value in relation to the others. That means it's very foundational. It's kind of like when you think of theology, you start with inspiration, in the Bible. If you don't get your bibliology right, then the other doctrines don't make sense because everything is founded on your understanding of the Bible. And so identity is very, very important. It impacts the most fundamental questions of life, is the blank there. Yeah, I'm just going to be reading these off my notes. The most fundamental questions of life: education, finances, friends, marriage, employment, religion. And that's because the huge question is, does it depend on me as an individual, or is it all about what? The community, right, everybody else. Is it the group that's important, or is it me as an individual? Okay. Letter B, therefore, it is foundational to the other cultural dimensions, foundational. All right. Well, I think we've probably already made this clear, but letter A at the bottom there, the most individualistic nation in the world is? Good old yours truly, United States. There are lots of individualistic nations in the West, but the United States seems to top it all. Letter B, the most collectivistic, and this could be debated.
Oh, sorry, I have a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if you mentioned it here, but it was like the LGBTQ plus sign. Like, is that like major in other cultures, or is it just?
Okay, LGBTQ plus, is it a big deal in other cultures, or is it mostly here in the U.S.? It is a big deal in other cultures, especially in Northern Europe. Right now, it's a big deal. Some of the Nordic, Norway, Sweden, you'll find it in places like the Netherlands as well. There are lots of reasons why. The reason it's so big a deal here is because the United States has the ability and the will to publicize this kind of stuff with resources that most other countries don't have. We have an incredible engine of resources and an incredibly liberal media that just loves to propagate all of that. And everybody in the world likes to tune in to American sites, websites. So the ease with which we propagate that is, and it's interesting that there is an individualistic and collectivistic side to that. The individualistic side of the moral revolution is what? Of the LGBTQ plus movement is what? Where's the individualism come in?
It's all about me and how I.
Yep. Who do I think I am? I don't care what my biology says. or what anybody else says. It's who I think I am today. Tomorrow I might think I'm something different. It doesn't matter. It's all about me. What's the collectivistic side?
It's all about, like, what would my community think?
If you don't fit in to the LGBTQ plus way of thinking, you are on the wrong side of history, you're outdated, you're committing a hate crime against your community, and so on and so forth. So there is both a collectivistic and an individualistic thrust to it, which is one of the things that makes it so powerful. Okay? So yeah, that's a good question. Very good. But other countries are getting on board with that, although and you know, I've heard some statements about portions, at least, of Canada that are even, you know, ahead of us in some of their thinking. So it's not just us, but because of our resources and our image in the world, we have the ability and the responsibility with what we do with that, you know, and unfortunately, we're not being very responsible. Good question. The most collectivistic country, letter B, would be what? And again, this is debated, but it's somewhere in the 2/3 majority world. How's that? It doesn't help you much, right? China is still considered to be, even though you could debate that because of Western influence and so on, but it's still very much, very, very collectivistic, okay? All right, number 4, characteristics of an individualistic culture. A baby. All right, now let me ask you this before we fill this in. You have a baby here in America, okay? Where is that baby going to sleep?
In its own crib in the nursery.
Why?
Because that's just how it is.
And that's an honest answer. We just do it that way. We just assume that that's the way to do it. Now, some parents do that because they don't want the baby waking them up. I mean, some mothers are very sensitive, and the baby, you know, just blinks in the middle of the night and she wakes up, right? So part of the practicality of that is, I want to be able to sleep, so I but there's a deeper issue than that. Just think, what would it be? What would be, in thinking of the American individualistic way of life, what would be the point of putting the baby in its own room in its own bed? Yeah. You're teaching that child from the very beginning how to be on its own. Now, obviously, a baby's not going to be on its own, but you understand, you're already developing that idea early on. So letter A, in an individualistic society, the baby is placed in its own bed and own room. You got that perfect. Ella, did you see the notes there somewhere? No. You got it right.
You're just so smart.
Yeah. Oh. Be careful. If you stand out too much, I'm going to have to bang you on the head to bring you into conformity with the rest of society. And we'll talk about the contrary to that when we get down to the next section. Letter B, the individual must be true to himself. You know, you've got to be true to yourself in an individualistic society. B, somebody said this last class period. What's the do me? Is that right? You got do you? Huh? What? Yeah, do you? Yeah, you got to do you. I saw there's a nails place that paints nails on Delaware, and it's got, I can't remember. It has something to that effect. I'll have to, next time I'm done, I'll have to pay attention to it, but it has that same idea. Okay, letter C is individual freedoms are paramount. Individual freedoms are paramount. When we talk about clusters later in the semester, we're going to add some things to this because studying clusters really does help to flesh out our understanding of these values. And so we'll be contributing more to this discussion at that time. Letter D, life is typically fast-paced. And why? What does a fast-paced lifestyle have to do with being individualistic?
It's on your own time.
Okay, it's on your own time, yes. And what else? Yeah.
You're doing what you want when you want.
You're doing what you want when you want, sorry.
Yeah, you take as much on yourself as you want to.
Okay. And why does that tend to make us fast-paced?
We have things to get done in a certain amount of time.
Okay. Yeah, we have things to get done in a certain amount of time. As a student, you're well aware of that, right?
Would being individualistic also make you value like tasks more than relationships?
Mm-hmm.
Like this culture is value relationships more than slow down.
Yep. And when we get to the time element later on, we'll talk about that more. Yeah. Yep. And what about human nature that kicks in here that makes individualistic people fast-paced? Just think about human nature.
You want to accomplish a lot?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about this in another cultural value called competition versus cooperation. In our culture, we have really worked hard over the last 240 some years as an American nation to really motivate people to get the most out of life, to be efficient, to get ahead. If you know, the early bird gets the worm, that is an individualistic statement. Right? The early bird gets the worm. If you don't get up early and get it done, somebody's going to beat you to it and you'll be left behind. Right? And so that creates a fast-paced mentality in life. And I'm not saying that everybody who lives a fast pace is selfish and competitive, but overall, that really contributes to a fast-paced society. We got to get it done, man. Make hay while the sun shines. That's another way of putting it. Okay, good. Letter E, love and romance are big in marriage choices. Love and romance. You say, well, wait a second. How could you ever marry somebody if you didn't fall in love and have a romantic relationship? Well, go into the 2/3 majority world and you'll see exactly how that happens. Love and romance are not priorities in most of the 2/3 majority world, at least when it comes to identifying a life partner. Okay, but it is in ours. We'll talk about that a little more. And then that other blank there, they're big in marriage. There's less stress on what? Of family members. What don't you have to seek in our culture if you want to marry somebody? What would you put in that blank? Approval. Now, you guys come from Christian backgrounds by and large. You understand the importance of the family and the importance of your parents, and most of you would really want the approval of your parents if you were going to marry somebody. Okay, I get that. Remember that Christianity tempers a lot of the things that we talk about. But in general, as an individualistic society, we don't demand that somebody, has the approval of his or her parents before getting married. In fact, if your parents don't like it and nobody in your family likes it, then you have the option of doing what? And not probably nobody, very few people in our Christian circles would do this, but get married how? Elope. Just take off and go to the justice of the peace, get married, and you're done. Who cares what if mom and dad don't like it? It's my life. I'm the one that has to live my life, not them. See? So you can actually, somebody who was prominent in our college here years ago, no longer here, eloped, got married because the parents weren't in favor of it. So now, again, I'm giving you the extreme of it, but if the family's not in favor of it, in the final analysis, it's my decision, not theirs. Okay, that's the edit. Letter F, there is little distinction between, and this is an important one, in-groups and out-groups. In-groups and out-groups. And let's define these. In-groups, number one, are groups to which you feel most loyal. I mean, there are certain groups that you would not want to offend in making a decision. And again, in your case, most of you coming from Christian backgrounds would probably say, I don't want to offend my family when I make a major decision in life, okay? Everybody, remember we said that there's no such thing as a purely individualistic or collectivistic society. It's going to be true of all of these values that we study. So, my wife and I watched the ball game ball games last night. Man, it was a tough loss against Spurgeon. But the fact is, there are certain a basketball team or any athletic team, soccer, volleyball, whatever, tends to be a very collectivistic unit, even if it's within an individualistic society. Okay, in fact, how many of you have played sports or groups? Okay, how many times did you hear the coach say, we win together and we lose together? Somebody misses a free throw. Somebody makes a mistake, throws the ball away and end up losing. I lost the game for the team. No, we win together and we lose together. Now, there is the option of blaming the refs. If the refs lost it for us. But see, that's a collectivistic statement. When a player says it was my fault, the coach says no, it wasn't. We're a team. That's a collectivistic idea. But in general, so you're going to be loyal to that group. Even in the dorms, there's a strong collectivism a lot of times in the dorms, and you want to be really careful that if there's anybody on campus you want to be able to get along with and work well with, it's the people you're living with. See? So, number 2, individualistic societies demand smaller and shorter expectations. And we're going to talk about this also in another cultural value. But smaller and shorter expectations, we are more short-term oriented as individuals in our culture. Individualistic cultures, because they're individualistic and there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of variation in what's going on, you can't be as long-term in commitments. Whereas in a collectivistic culture, because social harmony is most important, and that social harmony may take a long time to nurture, then you're much more likely to be long-term in your commitments. And by the way, some of that has to do with the age of your culture. The United States is how old? Is it 240? 246? This year it'll be 246, 2023. When my mother-in-law turned 80, the United States turned 240. Just do the math. My mother-in-law lived 1/3 of American history. I've lived about 25% of American history. That really makes our country look. I was in England at the Tower of London several years ago. My wife and I, we were on a trip with some students. And the guy, anybody been to the Tower of London in England, ever visit London? These guys are the old beef eaters, the guys that they were guards at Buckingham Palace, and then they retire, and some of them enjoy being tour guides. And if you know anything about British humor, they just love to let people have it. They're just, they can be really cruel, but in a fun sort of a way. So this big guy is standing up there and says, okay, where are the Americans here? Raise your hands real high, you Americans are here. So, we all raise our hands and we know something's gonna come. We just, but we just play along because they're having fun. So, okay, and he'd been talking about this. There was an object there near the Tower of London that was 1,100 years old. Just that one object there, okay? Now, remember, our country is like 246. So after he's talking about that, he says, you Americans here, he says, I got a question for you. I always wondered, he said, after you spend a couple of days in history class talking about American history, what do you do with the rest of the semester? Ha, 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 ha. Of course, we all laugh along with them, and they're just having a good time. But the point was well made, When you're talking about history class, there's not a whole lot of time that you need to spend on American history if you're going to cover the whole world because we're very, very young. But being a young nation is part of, not the only reason, but the younger you are as a nation, the more likely you are to be individualistic because as we'll see later on, the United States is considered the brat, the child, the rebellious child of England, of all of her children. And so anyway, just something to think about. Number 5, okay, now, collectivistic cultures. A baby sleeps where? Now, not always, but what is more typical? If you're living in a collectivistic culture, where might the baby sleep?
With the parents.
Yeah. Put it right in bed. Now you say, oh, can't do that. What if mom rolls over on the baby during the night? But it's very typical. In fact, some parents in collectivistic cultures will look at you as a Westerner and say, how could you do that to your child? Isolating your child in another room all by himself, all by herself? Well, we have the little sonar thing there, We didn't have that when we had our kids. That's a great thing now. I go over to work. I just went over to work out at 6 with my son at his house this morning, and he shows me, the monitor, and there she is, so But for some people in the 2/3 majority world, that would be considered neglectful. You keep the child with you. And the reason you do that is because you want that child to bond to you as parents. And so their mentality is not teaching the child to live on its own, but teaching the child to live in the group. Okay, very different. And one's right and one's wrong, right? Not necessarily. So a baby sleeps in a family bed and walks with mom and what do you guys call these things that you carry them in? Is it a sling? Okay, we used to call them, I think it was a certain company. Oh man, it's funny, I can't remember that. But they came out just about the time that we were having kids. And snugglies, they call them snugglies. And that's a big deal. But even in our culture, we do that. We do it, though, perhaps more for practical reasons. It frees the mom's arms up so she can live her life while she's carrying her baby, right? Okay, but not necessarily just that. Letter B, there is a high degree of loyalty in the in-group. And the in-groups are much bigger, in the 2/3 majority world. All right, letter C, people are defined by their social networks. Now, what are social networks? They're all the different kinds of groups that you interact with. Let's just start rattling off. Give me some examples of social networks that you guys are involved in. What are the components of your social network? Your jobs, people you work with. What else? Extracurricular activities. Yep. Student association, GRC, sports. What else? Church. What else? Yeah. Are we a social network right here? Well, kind of. Okay. We're a very small one. We only meet, for 3 hours a week. So but there, at least in a small way, we are actually a social network right here. What else?
Our DP groups.
Yeah, you're deep in groups, and it's in dorm life for those of you who live in the dorm in general. What else? Most of you are members of a group that you're not having contact with right now, and that is? Pardon? Your family. But you're still part of that. You still interact with them in some way, even though you're not living geographically with them right now. Right. So all of these are part of your social network. And in a collectivistic society, those social networks are much more united than they are here in America or in the West. Okay, letter D. A high priority is placed on honoring the family. Now, understand that no matter where you go in the world, the family is going to be the most collectivistic unit of society. Why? Because that's the way God created it. God created husband and wife to be the most basic relationship in society, and the family is the most basic unit. And so anywhere you go in the world, the family, with probably some exceptions out there, but in general, anywhere you go, the family will be the most collectivistic unit you find anywhere, as it should be. Okay? Letter E, it is preferable to blend in rather than stand out. Blend in. Yep. How do Westerners tend and again, here we go being stereotypical, right? But just, be stereotypical with me for a moment. How do Westerners tend to view blending in? You're, you don't want to what?
Voice your own opinion.
Okay, you're weak, afraid to voice your own opinion.
I feel like we're no longer contributing.
Okay, yeah, we're yielding
Yeah.
to somebody else's cowardly. Where's your backbone? Stand on your own 2 feet, right? And so blending in is often viewed as a weakness, as one of you used that word. Yep. F, there is a strong sense of duty in a collectivistic culture, which makes romance less significant in marriage. So when it comes to marriage, for example, in a collectivistic culture, what is your main duty?
Take care of the family.
Well, yeah, but even in considering who you're going to marry, what's your main duty? You're right. Once you're married, that's true. But even before you're married, what's your main responsibility when it comes to who you're going to marry?
Marry in society.
Well, okay, yeah. Maybe I'll ask it this way. Who's the most important influence in that decision? Yeah, your parents. Now, even here at Faith, we don't have time to, this is more for family class, but even here at Faith, there's quite a difference in the way that students and parents relate. And I'm sure you guys are well aware of that. There are students that come here to Faith and, basically once they're out of the home, they're on their own, And for that student to call home and say, hey, would it be okay if I date so-and-so? I say, why are you asking me? You're 18, you're on your own, you're in college, make your own decisions. Okay? There are other students on the other end of the perspective. They would never consider dating or accepting an invitation to date somebody without calling mom and dad and making sure that it's okay with them. All right? Now, we could argue the pros and cons of those. We're not going to do that. But that does exist, even among us here as a college. And you could probably all think of examples on both sides. I know of a student several years ago here, you wouldn't know him, who, mom and dad were very much against. Actually, it's funny because they're married now, but at the beginning, the dad was so against it. He told the guy, the future father-in-law, told the guy, I don't want to even see you or talk to you again. And today they're married and they're getting along fine with the in-laws. But it was quite a process. So, again, we got to avoid stereotypes because you do see examples of both. All right, letter G, life is lived at a slower pace. Why? Because gelling, nurturing the group takes time. And, we don't want to make quick, rash decisions just because it'll be beneficial to me as an individual. We want to make sure that we're doing that which promotes social harmony. So an African slogan, you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think, if I remember right, that Steve Galt may have quoted that this last October at Missions Conference. It's a really good saying. So down at the bottom there, exceptional tendencies do not signify a change from one to the other. This comes very slowly. The main idea of that statement is that cultural change does not happen quickly. Now, you'll hear people say that we're going through a very rapid cultural revolution right now with the LGBTQ+, and that is true. There has been incredible change over the last 20 years. Just absolutely incredible. But even so, there are underlying foundations to the American culture that do not change quickly. And you have to remember also that a lot of this so-called change is media hype, because the media wants to convince everybody that those who are against LGBTQ+ are in the minority and very few people, and that simply is not the case. So a lot of that is just image casting that is wrong, okay? So culture, the bedrock of cultures does not change quickly. Okay, and if you marry interculturally, that's something that you need to keep in mind. Getting married is not going to change either one of you quickly. Okay, it's going to be a blending of two cultures, and you're going to have to work together. All right, we did Maslow's pyramid, right? And the blank up there is what? Social harmony, right? Okay, letter number 6. How would this look at the societal level in governments and economies? Well, letter A, what political ideology would you use in one word to describe the West? Economically, politically, we are what? What's the big bad word out there? Capitalists. So it's capitalism versus socialism. And we could talk about socialism and communism and difference. They're very, very similar at their roots. So capitalism versus socialism. Now, think about it. How well would capitalism do in a very strongly collectivistic society? I'm not an economist, but this probably is not difficult to understand. Why would capitalism struggle in a strongly collectivistic society?
I guess when you're a capitalist, you have to stand out. To get ahead, you have to prove to everybody else that you're the one that can go a little bit farther.
Yep. Capitalism thrives on competition. Look, why do you want to have 2 or 3 internet sources to choose from when you hook up your internet service at home? Because if there's only one, there's nobody who's going to control the prices. See? Now, our water here in Ankeny, we only have one water company. Okay? And there's, what if the water company wanted to raise their prices tomorrow? What are we going to do about it? Well, if you want to drink water, you pay more. So how do we get around that? Well, because you can elect people who are going to make those decisions. If you don't like what's happening with the water company, you can elect people or remove people from office who aren't doing the job. So capitalism thrives on competition. We like competing companies because it not only keeps the prices down, but it also improves the quality. If you want to win, if you want customers, you got to have a good product. Okay, but socialism is the other way around. All right, letter B, KFC and McDonald's. In a collectivistic culture, there are bigger eat-in areas. That first blank there is eat-in areas. For instance, we were in Japan. There was McDonald's there where we were visiting, and that McDonald's did not have a drive-through. Now, I'm not saying that there are no drive-thrus in collectivistic countries, but there was no drive-thru, and we would say, wait a minute, where's the drive-thru? The drive-thru is fundamental to a McDonald's, right? Or any fast food restaurant, but not in Japan. You go in and you buy and you sit down and you eat, because in a collectivistic culture, it's more about the event than it is about the service itself. It's not so much about efficiency. Okay, so more eat-in areas, and we mentioned this last class, no employee of the month. You're not going to see somebody's picture there. He's the employee of the month. Now, sure as I said that, you guys, somebody will travel to a 2/3 majority world country, and you'll find that. So again, we're speaking stereotypically. Number 7, tips for working with individualism, or with individualists. Okay? And of course, most of us come from individualistic backgrounds, so this is no brainer to us. Now, letter A, remember that the locus, not the insect locust, but the locus, you could say even focus. Yeah, Miriam, locus is kind of like the focus. I don't know, maybe that's a common word for you. The locus of control lies within the individual. No brainer. Letter B, allow for autonomy. Now, there's nothing wrong with the word autonomy. It's the abuse of the word that we're against. And then B, be aware that rapid decision making is important. Yeah. All right, and then number 8, tips for working with collectivists. A, remember that the locus of control lies within the, and what was that little buzzword, hyphenated term we used? In group. It's more about what is going to be best for the group. See, you're an employee here in our country. You don't like your job, you don't like your boss, you don't like your pay. So what do you say? I'm going to go out and find me another job. We have a problem finding another job? Are you kidding? All you got to do is drive anywhere around here and you'll see signs on almost every door. We're hiring, we're hiring, we're hiring, we're hiring. COVID and other things, brought that about. And so, but in a collectivistic culture, you're more likely to say, how's this going to affect the company if I leave? How will it affect our community harmony? Because this company is part of my community, and my family knows, and that sort of thing. So how does this all fit in? It's not in first place about you, okay? Letter B, allow time for consensus building, hyphenated term, consensus building. Remember we talked about fast-paced and slow-paced? In a collectivistic culture, if you're having a meeting, let's say you're working in a company, or let's just use the church analogy since we're preparing people for ministry. In a church setting, if you're going to have a business meeting, okay, you need to be careful that you don't think, okay, these are the items that we need to get to treat today. This is the agenda. When we do a business meeting in our country, and I'm not against this, I'm just saying this is the way we do it, we have an agenda, and there's a football game on this afternoon, people have dinner in the crock pot, so in an hour, if we're having a business meeting in the morning, we got to get through these agenda items, within the next hour, so people can go home. And so we really work hard to be efficient and get through them, okay? In a collectivistic culture, that's not going to fly. You may have an agenda, but you may not get through more than a couple of items on that agenda, and that's okay, because most important is not getting through the agenda. Most important is building consensus, and there may be a lot of discussion involved before you do that. And you may decide, I don't feel there's a consensus here, so we're going to come back next week and continue talking about this. And a lot of pastors in the West would be very frustrated with that because we want to get this done and move on, see? And so this is a big difference. And if God leads some of you to a collectivistic society, this is something you're going to have to be careful. And I've mentioned this before, but Robert's Rules of Order, and I will mention, we're going to mention that again. You have to be very careful about that, okay? I had a friend of mine tell me, and I had never thought about this before, that Robert's Rules of Order was actually designed as a manager of conflict. The purpose of Robert's Rules was to manage conflict. Robert's Rules assumes that there are different opinions out there and everybody's going to be fighting for their opinion. And Robert's Rules is a mechanism by which you manage that in a decent way. So when the vote's taken, it may barely pass, but if it barely passes, it passes. In a collectivistic society, a vote may pass with 2/3 majority, but if there are two individuals who are older, highly respected saints, we've got a problem. Because the majority vote is not what drives collectivistic decision-making. It's consensus building, and the consensus is influenced more by certain individuals who are highly regarded as fathers in the community, leaders. What was the word that the Bible used of leaders in the communities of Israel? What's the buzzword? We actually adopted it for pastors, elders. The community elders, there were elders in the communities. They were patriarchs of families and so on. And they were part of the Sanhedrin, and they were huge in decision making. See? And so consensus building is very important to maintain social harmony, and the primary influence of consensus building are the elders, the older, highly respected people in the community. All right? Now, does that mean we can't exercise congregational church government in a collectivistic culture? No. It's not whether you have congregational government or not, it's how it functions. Does that make sense to everybody? This is not ecclesiology. We're not talking about, but you can have congregational church government in a collectivistic society. It's how you arrive at a congregational decision that makes the difference. Yeah.
like the older respected people like chose someone else and then the majority said no, like would they go and debate that?
Okay, so that's a very good question, and I'm going to back up and ask you a question that probably should be asked even before that. Should we even vote? Now, just think about that for a minute. Thanks, Delaney. Think about that. We might think, well, how else are you going to make? How can you make a decision without a vote? Because in the West, it's inconceivable to make a group decision without a vote. I say inconceivable, very difficult. In a collectivistic culture, you can. And how do you do that? By discussing, by milking something, by really nurturing something, so that the consensus of the group emerges, and it may take time for that to happen, and a vote never becomes necessary. You ever think about that? I'm not saying that if you go out and become a pastor, that you should try that in your church here. It might not work here. Okay? You've got to be sensitive to the culture you're living in. In Germany, I'm assuming that voting is a normal way of making decisions, right? Yeah, and it's part of the West, Western Europe, it's part of the Western world. But in many countries, it's arriving at a consensus. And you say, well, how do you know when the consensus is reached? If you live in that culture, you'll know it. It's subjective, but it becomes obvious to the group. It's very, very interesting, very, very foreign to our way of thinking. Okay? All right. Okay, good. So some tips. Okay, letter C, final one is understand that building lasting relationships is important. Lasting relationships. Now, I'm going to say something that's unkind, but I'm going to do it just to be exaggerating. Okay? In the West, individual people are dispensable. We don't like somebody's contribution, we just get rid of him, or we overrule him, right? Again, I'm being very extreme to make a point. Whereas in a collectivistic culture, that little boy at the chalkboard that's trying to draw the parallelogram, he's important. The lost sheep that needs to be part of the fold in Luke 15 is important. And so we nurture that unity to keep everybody in. Now, I just made the West look really bad and the two-thirds world look really good. Again, I'm only using an extreme illustration. There are bad sides to that as well. For instance, and we'll talk about this more later, but in a collectivistic society, oftentimes people who are very gifted and have very good ideas are overlooked, okay, because their ideas go against the group. Whereas in the Western world, where individual opinions and ideas are valued, oftentimes companies and churches benefit greatly because of that. So if you're starting a church in a collectivistic society and there's a person in your church that is extremely gifted and perceptive and has really good ideas, you have to be patient if that person is not accepted, immediately by the group. Because consensus, especially if it's a younger person, okay, because older people tend to be more highly valued. All right. Okay, so everybody get the notes? All right, and online students say, so we have a few minutes. I'm just going to open up the subject of authority here. So give me an online student, sorry for the blank screen all that time, but I wanted to get through the notes. So let me just pull up the next one here, and we'll at least open it up, and then we'll finish it on Friday. And that is authority, okay? Now, again, you will notice that in talking about identity, I have already kind of dipped into some of these other values, and that's because of what I said earlier. Identity is so foundational to everything else that you really can't talk, at least in detail, about identity without talking to some degree about these other ones, because they're united, they're tied together. But I'll try to avoid unnecessary repetition. All right, authority. So let's see, I'll probably step out of the camera for a second, but I'm gonna use a little visual display here, okay? Beginning of class, I walk in the door. All right. Okay, let's get started. What are we gonna talk about today? Okay. How does that strike you?
Sounds awesome.
You know something? I could get used to this really quickly. All right. Besides being awesome, what else do you think about this? Who's disrespecting who? Who said that?
I think you would be disrespecting the teacher.
No. I'm the teacher.
I thought you were protecting.
Oh, no. I'm the teacher. I'm playing. Now, you hear what she just said? She couldn't even tell that I was the teacher because I came in acting like, and
Disrespect.
in our culture, yeah, disrespectful student maybe. Okay, now that's fascinating that you said that. I wasn't expecting that. But when we talk about power distance, authority, okay, the one extreme of that is that the leader blends in so well with the group that a visitor coming in would not even be able to detect who's in charge. You ever sit down with a group of people in a company you work for and everybody's dressed exactly the same, they're all sitting at a round table, and if you were an outsider, you would have no clue who the boss is, who's the CEO, who's in charge here, okay? Now, here's the other extreme. I walk in. Now, first of all, I should have brought a coat and something to make me look very different from the rest of you. Just pretend that I have this very formal coat on, a tie, okay? Good morning, class. Please sit up. You're slouching in your chair. Wrong way. Okay? And in some cultures, you wouldn't even be looking at me. Because in some more extreme collectivistic cultures, and again, here we're going to talk about collectivistic, authority is so extreme that the student feels that he's disrespecting the professor even by looking at him. Paul?
In some culture, in my culture, where I come from, if President Tilson's watching, we all have to stand up
Yes.
and greet him. And the professor will actually go to the corner, well, not like to the corner, but just standing there while giving the president the pulpit to say whatever he wants to say.
Interesting, yeah. Which proves the point. It's a very, very different scenario. And we'll talk more about classroom ethics in a power distance context here. Okay, so we've got just a couple minutes here. What is power distance? On your notes there, page 12, it is the degree to which members of a society are comfortable with inequality in power, influence, and wealth. That's, in other words, what will a society tolerate when it comes to a distinction between the powerful and the weak, you know, the influential and the non-influential? And that's the kind of thing we're going to, but notice that the angle here is that this actually comes from the group. If in America, would we tolerate, you know, a totalitarian-looking person, you know, trying to lead a company or lead a classroom? We would probably tend to react against that, because that's not the way that we are wired as an economy, as a nation. Okay, well, hey, just wanted to break into that, but we'll come back on Friday and talk more about power distance. But thanks for your good contributions. Pardon? Yeah, up there at the top, it was the degree to which members of a society are comfortable with inequality. And I'll repeat that again next class. I just want to break into it. Okay, thank you.